A lot happened this week in the world of mixed martial arts as well as the world of kickboxing as we head into Bellator's second ever Dynamite card featuring kickboxing and MMA taking place at the same night at the Scott Trade Center in St. Louis, Missouri. But before we get to previewing Dynamite 2, I'm going to get to the top headlines in combat sports. Starting first with, as I mentioned, kickboxing and mixed martial arts. He will be fighting at Dynamite 2 as part of the kickboxing portion of the card, Mr. Joe Schilling. And words have come out according to a report on BloodyElbow.com via Nick Baldwin, who wrote the article, saying that Glory is a dog expletive promotion and it paid its commentators to talk negatively of him in his last fight at Glory 30. And throughout the article, it's saying that Schilling had wanted to be out of his Glory contract for quite some time, especially after his win over Jason Wilness at Glory 24. And there was a clause, kind of like a restricted free agent clause, if you go to other team sports, that didn't allow Schilling to sign with a promotion in that amount of time. However, Joe Schilling fought twice to kind of speed up that process, once at Glory 27 and, of course, last month there in Los Angeles at Glory 30. And that kind of sped up the process of him being able to compete here at Bellator Dynamite number 2 coming up this weekend in St. Louis. Kind of goes over saying that Glory needed him and they were trying to devalue me once the deal didn't take place, and they really wanted me to be on the Fight Pass card because they're on, as quoted in this article, ESPN 27 or something. And he's basically saying Glory's not a good organization. Nobody should promote them or follow them. And Scott Coker and Spike TV at Bellator have been, nothing but nice to him. And I take what Joe's saying with a grain of salt. Now, we've had Joe here on the program, and while, yeah, he's a very passionate guy, I think anytime things don't work out the way you want them to, and you leave a job or a company or friend or relationship, sometimes you say bad things that may not necessarily be true. And what Joe Schilling is saying is probably half true. I think there are some truths to that, but anytime you're in a contract negotiation between whether you're a football player in a team or a fighter in a promotion, it's a two-way street. What Glory's offering may be great for them, but not great for Joe Schilling. And what Joe Schilling wants may be great for him, but may not necessarily be great for Glory. So it is a two-way street, and I think that Joe Schilling is maybe a little bit bitter because he never got that one thing that escaped him, that one thing he was searching for, and that was a Glory championship, an actual division championship. And maybe because he wasn't able to get there, or maybe because he didn't get that fight with Artem Levin at Glory 24, maybe a lot of things change. I don't know, but he wanted out of Glory. He got his wish. He's not going to fight in Glory anymore. He's not going to fight for Bellator kickboxing, and that's fine. I guess for him, he soured on the whole deal, and that's unfortunate because Glory, I believe, and most would agree, that it's the number one kickboxing organization in the world. So you drop out Joe Schilling, who maybe he's not, but I think over at least the last 5 years, he has been the best American kickboxer. I don't think that's too much of a question. Is no longer in the promotion. You add in, I can't 100% confirm this, but it doesn't appear as though former middleweight champion Artem Levin will be in the organization any longer following his antics at Glory 27. You add that in, Glory has lost 2 of their top 5 middleweights just like that. And that was already kind of a weak division, really outside of the guys that were in the top 3 there with Schilling, Levin, and Simon Marcus. Simon Marcus just beat Dustin Jacoby relatively handily. Now, that doesn't mean Dustin Jacoby can't come back and win. I mean, he's still a very young guy in the sport of kickboxing. I mean, he has less than 20 professional fights, which compared to somebody like Simon Marcus or Satachi, who will be fighting here at Glory 31, which we'll get to in a bit, who had 300 fights, he still has a lot to learn, still can come back, but the rest of the division is very thin in the middleweight division. If Simon Marcus looks as though he'll probably take on Jason Wilness, if he gets by Jason Wilness, it's definitely thin in the middleweight division, for sure. So while Joe Schilling, I think, probably made some valid points about the organization, I also think at the same time he's just kind of a guy that maybe a little bit bitter, and he's like, hey, I'm not with them anymore, so I'm going to talk crap about him. So anyway, still a fan of Joe Schilling and look forward to his fight here at Dynamite 2. Moving on here with other headlines. The biggest headline, at least for most fans in the world of mixed martial arts, is the UFC has reportedly sold, that means Zuffa, the parent company, and is accepting a $4.2 billion bid. This would be for the whole of the organization, not just a piece of it. And the UFC has long denied this sale and long denied even rumors of what it's valued and talks about it. I'm getting some information here from Bloody Elbow. And they even hint at taking legal action against any media representatives that have made the claim that the UFC has been sold. And I think if it had been sold, why would they take such a hard line against these people? And why would they even hint at legal action? Because if that proves to be false, they're going to be out a lot on their reputation, and they're going to be out money. And it makes no sense. Now, their reputation against the media right now is already kind of hurt with this whole Ariel Helwani thing that happened a couple weeks ago. Now they're threatened to sue reporters who are saying the UFC has been sold. I don't know why this is such a big deal to the UFC, that they're so adamant that they aren't in talks and nobody's reporting. The media is reporting companies here. You know, the names have been come up several times of what organizations have been trying for a bid for the organization up ahead of UFC 200. Maybe it's they don't want to, you know, deny what's going on, or in terms of having that somehow delay the events, not delay the events of 200, I mean delay the promotion, you know, and people talking about this instead of UFC 200. And even Randy Couture himself, again, this is going on Bloody Elbow as well, has saying that reliable sources to him has told him the UFC has been sold. And that was an interview with ESPN 1100 this past weekend. And apparently Dana White would stay on as the president. I'm not really sure. It looks as though, you know, this may have happened. I don't know. I don't know what to think until the official word comes out. I think that the sale, I don't know if it's a good thing. I don't know if it's a bad thing. It's really hard to say until moves are done. Obviously, if it does happen, it's going to make the Fertittas a lot of money. Dana White will make some money regardless whether he stays on as president or not. And really, as long as they're able to kind of keep the status quo a little bit in terms of still being able to put on good quality fights, still be able to have great talent, and, you know, maybe change some things, obviously. Some change may be needed, but as long as they don't ruin it, I think that would be the only thing I would not want to happen. So we'll see how this goes. It's obviously a continuing story. I don't really have much of an opinion one way or the other. I'm just surprised that this whole thing really just started a couple months ago with rumors of how much the UFC is worth and would they sell it, and now all of a sudden people are reporting that it's sold, it's confirmed, $4.2 billion. It seems like it happened really quickly. And for the Fertitta brothers to buy in for, you know, a few $1 million and now turn it into a $4.2 billion profit, that's incredible. And if they want to get out of the game, then, you know, $4.2 billion is a great way to get out of the game. But for two gentlemen, and I guess three if you add in Dana White, that have built this company basically from the ground up. From 1993 to 2001, it really was not that great of a company. I mean, they took this thing definitely from the fire and have turned it into something that at least most people would agree is a multi-billion-dollar company. It is surprising that after 15 years they are looking to get out of the game. I mean, they have a lot of money. They own a lot of these casinos already. How much more money do you need? I don't know. I guess once you have so much, maybe that's all you want. I don't know. It seemed like they were building headway and really wanting to make the UFC, into one of the largest sports in the world, if not the largest sports in the world. And maybe they'll miss out on that with selling it, but we'll see. It's obviously a continuing story and a very interesting one at that. Speaking of the UFC and Fight Pass, of course, Glory will have part of their event on Fight Pass. One of the events on Fight Pass that they just had was EFN 50, which featured former Pride heavyweight champion Fedor Emelianenko as he took on former UFC fighter Fabio Maldonado, and kind of a loose tie that Fedor kind of fought with the UFC name attached to it, with it being broadcast on the Fight Pass. And he did win his fight against Maldonado, albeit a close and maybe even controversial decision in this fight. And in an article by Bloody Elbow, looking at what Dana White said in terms of him possibly fighting in the UFC afterwards, saying they were going to let him die before they stopped that fight. You know that? Dana White said. But a testament to how tough and durable and mentally strong Fedor is, man. He was out. He was out. Literally, when he got back up, when a guy's on crazy legs the way that he was on crazy legs, it's not like he was on crazy legs and able to avoid punches after that. He continued to get hit with bombs by Maldonado, and he made his way through it. But I'll tell you this, those refs were willing to let him die before they stopped that fight. Number one and number two, Fedor's got a chin, and he's a tough guy. White also brought up that the Fight Pass viewership for Fedor's fight is saying, I'll tell you this, Fight Pass did very well with that fight, so people do still want to watch Fedor. Yeah, it's definitely interesting that people still want to watch Fedor because he's an intriguing figure. He at one time was the greatest fighter, the greatest active fighter. And most people still consider him the greatest fighter of all time. And while he is definitely past his prime, I mean, you can make the case like Dana White said, he was out against a guy who was a light heavyweight, a guy that the current UFC heavyweight champion dispatched in under a minute. So Fedor is definitely not the same guy that was dominating Pride over in Japan in the early to mid-2000s. And while he's not that guy, you still see kind of glimpses, like he said, with his chin still coming back. And I don't think he's at top-level competition anymore, or he can't fight top-level competition anymore. And I still want him to see in the UFC just for the fact to say they got him. I think it would be an accomplishment in itself just to sign him and have him fight once inside the octagon. Win or lose, doesn't even matter the opponent. I think it would be a feat for him to fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And I think from that standpoint, just because he's this great unknown that has never fought in the UFC, and all these other guys have, and there's all those question marks like how we would have done in the UFC, I think just getting him in there for one fight would be enough for me. And for Fedor, I don't think he has that much left. He would have a lot to gain monetarily because whatever fight he would be on, I think would definitely garner a lot of interest. It would be a good pay-per-view, and I think it would be a great way for him to retire his final fight be in the UFC. And the UFC wouldn't have to worry about multi-fight deals or really much getting ruined or his legacy getting destroyed or having to fulfill a 3 or 5 or 6 fight contract or something like that. I think one fight against somebody that's also a veteran, maybe a guy who had fought in Pride previously. I think Mark Hunt would be a great matchup. Frank Mir, Andrei Arlovski. I know Overeem's fighting for the title, but if things don't go the way, a fight against Alistair Overeem. Junior Dos Santos would be incredible. Josh Barnett is a former Pride star. That would be a good fight as well. So I think there are a lot of good matchups for Fedor. And I would like to see him fight in the UFC. But if you haven't checked the fight already, maybe it'll change your opinion. If you check out EFN 50 on the Fight Pass, maybe that will change your thoughts on whether or not you want to see him not just fight in the UFC, but fight ever again in the sport of mixed martial arts. Also in the news, Derek Brunson had to pull out of his fight for UFC 200, and it looks as though his eyes had to be checked up after LASIK surgery that he had 4 years ago, and it looked as though the status of his eyes will keep him from fighting, and he said his vision has been blurry and has had double vision for almost 2 weeks, according to a tweet from the fighter this past Sunday. A post on his personal Facebook page this past Sunday that Bloody Elbow has reported on. So Derek Brunson, unfortunately, out of his fight against Gegard Mousasi, but I believe Mousasi has gotten a replacement opponent. I think Thiago Santos will replace Brunson. Also, speaking of UFC 200, Brock Lesnar, who many found out that he was even fighting at UFC 200 a couple of weeks ago, has come out and said that he has already been tested 5 times in about 2 weeks by USADA, according to Tim Burke of BloodyElbow.com. And, of course, it's just a one-off fight here for July 9th, but he will be exempt from their normal rules because he's obviously returning less than 4 months he can be fight. So he's been tested 5 times here in the past 2 weeks. Not to mention, I'm sure he probably had to be tested by the Nevada State Athletic Commission to be granted a license to fight in the state as well. So not just USADA, but he's probably been tested probably 8 or 10 times overall with this whole entire process. So it's not too surprising that many's came out, but it's still good that they're showing that, hey, even though he's a big name, the UFC is banking on him, they're still going through as much testing as they can in this short amount of time to make sure that he is clean, and also sets a good precedent moving forward if the UFC wants to try anything else like this again. Also, former friend of the show, Cody Garbrandt, it looks as though his next fight will be not at UFC 203, as he told me in his interview before his win over Thomas Almeida, but it looks as though it will be at UFC 202, which will be a few weeks before in Las Vegas, which of course will be headlined by Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. He'll be taking on former WEC top contender and current top 15 bantamweight Take Mizugaki. Now, not only is the timing being UFC 202 instead of his fighting in his hometown in Cleveland at UFC 203, that's curious. Also the fact he's taking on Take Mizugaki, who hasn't been great as of late, is definitely on the downside of his career, and to me, not better than the guy he just knocked out in the first round in Thomas Almeida. Now, I don't know if this is because Cody wanted to get in there sooner rather than later, if maybe they already have a big fight lined up for UFC 203 as far as a co-main event or whatnot, or maybe they thought, he kind of fought in Pittsburgh already, close to his hometown. I don't know. But it seems odd to me that, first of all, he wouldn't be fighting in Cleveland. I think he would really want to do that, considering the UFC's never been to Cleveland. And 2, why Take Mizugaki? I think there are a lot better opponents that he could have faced now. Maybe that's because Brian Caraway, after his latest win over Aljamain Sterling, is not ready to go. Of course, Caraway was out nearly a year between wins from Sterling to Eddie Wineland. So with that in mind, it's not that surprising that Caraway is not going to be accepting a fight against Cody to fight in his backyard in Cleveland in September. We may see, or maybe Caraway is promised a title shot at Dominic Cruz. Of course, there's still a big fight coming up between Rafael Asunciao and TJ Dillashaw that has a lot to do within this bantamweight division. So maybe that will have something to do with it as well. Once again, I am your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. Of course, you can like the Beyond the Cage Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Like our page today. Once we hit 500 likes, we'll be doing a great contest, giving away a whole bunch of goodies, mainly signed photos from a whole bunch of people. We talked about Joe Schilling earlier. Joe Schilling will be one of the people. Dwayne Ludwig, Brian Ebersol. Just to name a few names there that we'll be giving away signed photos for when we reach 500. I think all in total it's like 10 or 11 signed photos we'll be giving away for the contest once we hit 500 likes. So if you haven't done already, please visit facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And if you haven't done already, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Last weekend, busy weekend, as 3 major MMA organizations had fights here in North America. Starting first with World Series of Fighting 31 in Connecticut, had a 5-fight featured main card. Saw Phil Hawes just put a clinic there on Joshua Key, taking him down early, landing huge, big, powerful elbows. Hawes shifted position a couple times. Key did his best to try to stave off those elbows, but eventually succumbed to strikes in round number 1 at 252 for a TKO loss. Next fight, Luis Palomino, a very exciting guy, has been a part of their lightweight division pretty much since the start of World Series of Fighting. Dropped down to featherweight to take on Shaman Moraes. Very close fight, very entertaining fight, but you could tell Palomino was a little more reserved than he had been in previous fights under the World Series of Fighting banner. And I think just that little bit of hesitation, that little bit of not having that kind of extra oomph or gas tank, being down 10 more pounds than usual, I think Moraes was able to kind of capitalize on that, and definitely, in my opinion, able to take 2 of the 3 rounds in what was a unanimous decision victory for Shaman. And I think Palomino does have a future in this division. Obviously, first time making that weight cut against a very tough guy like Moraes. Not surprising he lost, but he was right there. I think if he gets that weight cut figured out, I think he could be a threat for for World Series of Fighting featherweight division, or Bellator's featherweight division. But it was a good fight nonetheless, one of the better fights this weekend. John Howard versus Michael Arant. Very close fight. Arant did a lot better than I thought he did. I thought you could make a case that he took the first round, but to me, John Howard just kind of relentless in his pressure. His takedowns weren't always successful. His strikes weren't always successful, but he was the one really pushing the action. And Arant was really just trying to be defensive, counter. Yeah, he landed some nice jabs, a little nice kicks, but to me, he wasn't being offensive enough to get this victory. And in the third round, Howard, to me, really took over, really cemented that third round to me. If there was any question about who won that fight, and I would have gave Howard probably rounds 2 and 3 for sure, but all 3 judges saw it the way of Howard, 30-27, surprisingly enough for John Howard to win his World Series of Fighting debut. Jason High versus Mike Ricci. Boy, what a fight. Jason High had an early takedown. After that, wasn't able to really take the fight back to the ground. Mike Ricci was showing some very impressive stand-up that really continued into round 2, where it looked like he had Jason High hurt, possibly out. And then, out of nowhere, Jason High landed a huge power punch on Ricci, completely took Ricci out, fell on the ground. High landed a few more punches. A lot of them were being blocked, but still, Ricci was not doing a lot to get out of that position, so the referee had no choice but to step in and stop it at 4-8 in the second round. And a huge comeback for Jason High. Definitely one of the better fighters World Series of Fighting had, and so was Mike Ricci. But Ricci definitely had victory snatched from him. He definitely had it. And that's what happens sometimes in the sport. You get a guy hurt, you come in, and they're defensive. They see, like, I might be out. I'm just going to throw as hard as I can and see what happens. And that's what Jason High did, and that ended up working out for him. And sure, you don't want to be constantly put in that position, but it is pretty nice when you can go from getting dominated like that to winning the fight in such a quick change of momentum. And Jason High is a guy that, with this victory, could very well be fighting Justin Gaethje maybe in his next fight, because there ain't too many guys left that World Series of Fighting can throw at him, so why not Jason High, and especially after a highlight reel knockout and comeback like that. Blagoy Ivanov against Josh Copeland. Man, this may be one of the most bloody fights I have ever seen, especially for a fight that went 25 minutes. Just, wow, these guys were battling out warriors. A big difference, much like I said in the John Howard fight. It seemed like Copeland was just trying to defend, trying to not have that one big shot take him down. And he was too worried, I think, about what Ivanov was going to do. And Ivanov was, to me, the whole fight pushing forward and pushing forward. And I think Copeland maybe definitely won a round, maybe 2, but I think I had it with 2 of the judges there, 49-46, as Ivanov was the one landing, to me, the more bigger and impactful strikes. Now, that cut was definitely affecting Ivanov. I think it did. But he's still coming forward, still throwing bombs, a fight that I definitely didn't think was even going to go into the 3rd round, let alone go to the 5th round. And these two guys got so bloody and sweaty at the end. I think there was a takedown attempt, possibly from Copeland. I think it was from Copeland. And Ivanov kind of slid across the canvas a little bit, and they both kind of packed back up. I mean, they were just so, these are big, massive, heavyweight dudes. So big and sweaty and hairy. And there's no way they were going to, like, stick to that canvas. It was crazy. And definitely a good fight. You could make a case for the best fight of the weekend. I think it was that good. It was a really good fight. And for a card that, I'll admit, I said it on last week's show, I did not really think this was going to be that great of a card. And it was a pleasant surprise. Normally cards, at least for World Series you're fighting, you think are going to be bad, are going to be bad. And the ones you think are going to be good are either usually really bad as well, but there's sometimes a few diamonds in the rough. And this was definitely a diamond in the rough, World Series of Fighting 31. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, I'm sure NBC Sports will probably replay it at some point, but definitely the main event I think is worth a watch. It was definitely some fun. Getting to Bellator, of course, they had Bellator 156 this past weekend leading up to Dynamite, and it featured a title fight between Marcus Galvão and Eduardo Dantes for the Bantamweight Championship. And that was a good fight, don't get me wrong, but I want to get to some of the other cards, fight on the card here. Oh, let's see. It started with, I think the Ben Reiter, AJ Matthews, was that fight on the card? No, I don't think it was. Oh, I think, no, Chris Honeycutt versus Mikhail Parlo was the first fight of the Spike TV main card. Good fight. Chris Honeycutt taking a guy, Mikhail Parlo, who I think is a good fighter in this division. Obviously, he's coming off a long layoff, had not fought for Bellator in about 2 years, but did fight in GMC 7, which is German MMA Championship, and he did get a win in November of 2015. So it's been about 7 months that he just had fought professionally, 2 years for Bellator. And at 185, I mean, he's definitely a little undersized. Obviously, Honeycutt was a guy that was coming up from 170 as well. So in this fight, it kind of worked out. But you could see a little rust there, even though his last fight was only 7 months ago. He had a really good first round. I thought Parlo did a great job of stopping the takedowns of the good wrestler in Honeycutt. But then in rounds 2 and 3, it kind of seemed like he was just run out of gas. And even though he was stopping the takedowns, Honeycutt was starting to kind of key on him fading and thought, all right, if I can just throw something in his face and keep going, he's slowing down, and even if I don't stop my takedowns, I can use what striking I do have to get to him because he's fading. He's not throwing those combinations like he was in round 1. Honeycutt did a really good job with the jab, and then to me in round 3, really started to add on to the once Parlo was definitely fading and feeling it. And this was a nice win for Chris Honeycutt, up a weight class against a very talented striker in Mikhail Parlo. And Chris Honeycutt, I think, is a guy that can do a lot in this division, whether welterweight or middleweight. Like I said, a little undersized for middleweight, especially considering some of the huge guys they have in the middleweight division. But I think he is a solid fighter. He's still very young at just 27 years old. So I think if he can continue on his striking and work those combinations, work that jab, and obviously, his takedowns did get shut down in that fight against Parlo, and fights like that are going to happen, but he still is a good wrestler, and for Parlo, I think it's, again, maybe working on that conditioning a little bit, but he's shown that first round that he still has it. I don't think he's a guy that's completely done, but he's going to definitely have to get back in the gym and work on that conditioning if he wants to stick around Bellator. Speaking of the 185 division, an upset, in my opinion, as former middleweight champion Brandon Halsey got submitted by John Salter, who, 15 fights, this was his 15th fight, and, 31 years old. He had been around a while, but he hadn't fought for Bellator since January of last year, so it's been about 16 months. He hasn't fought since then, and, actually be a friend of the show, Dustin Jacoby at Bellator 132. So he had fought in the UFC at one point, going 1-2 with his one win over Jason McDonald. So this is a guy that's been around the block in the world of mixed martial arts, competing professionally since 2009. So a guy that, a 6'1" solid fighter, a guy that, had, coming into this fight, all of his wins by finish. This was a dangerous guy. And Brandon Halsey, I don't know if he was respect him or what, but he doesn't seem like the same fighter since getting knocked out by Javier Carvalho in October of last year to lose the Bellator championship. And in this fight, he had an early takedown, wasn't able to stick it. Salter was, kind of piecing him up a little bit there on the feet. It seemed like Halsey really had no answer for it. Then instinctively went towards a takedown, and because those accumulation of shots, maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. I don't think his head was all there. Salter slapped a triangle choke on him and got the former champion to tap inside the first round at 4:03, and huge win for Salter. Salter now puts himself in the title picture here at Bellator. I mean, he's the guy that kind of was brought in to lose, really. I think that's a guy who hasn't fought in over a year in your organization. Not an outstanding record, but not a horrible record or anything like that, and ends up beating Brandon Halsey. And for Halsey, a guy that I've talked about several times on the show, I think has to move up. As weird as that sounds, coming off back-to-back finish losses, I think this weight cut is such a huge strain on his body, and I think it's affecting him physically. Obviously, I think his body is just cutting too much weight, and I think mentally, your brain's not supposed to dehydrate like that, and when you're cutting too much weight, it's definitely affecting your head too. I think that's something people don't consider. So your body's not going to be able to take those shots because it's not at the correct weight and the correct amount of water it's supposed to have in its body, and that can affect you physically in terms of your conditioning and, of course, your ability to take punches and recover from those punches. And I think for Halsey, I think moving up to 205 would be the best thing for him. And sure, he may be a little shorter than some of those guys, but I think body-wise, with his muscle build, I don't think that he would really get out-muscled by too many of those guys. And he obviously would have to cut 20 less pounds. I think that's huge. And it's not like Bellator's light heavyweight division is really that much, maybe a tad better than the middleweight, but I think you got to look at, if you want to do this more and not have your body take any more damage down the road looking at your life, not just your career, I think Halsey is going to have to do that. Maybe this second consecutive loss here in this division, maybe that will change the things for Brandon, because I think he still has he's a talented individual. I think he has a lot left in the tank, but I think moving up to 205, I think, would be the right move. Well, it wasn't quite the big-time opponent that he was hoping for, but Chide Njokuani was able to get a win, no less, against Thiago Jambo. And Jambo, he hung in there tough. I think the first round was pretty close. I think that you could have made a case he won the fight. Of course, incredible story. They talked about how he had to fight his friend and training partner on World Series of Fighting because one of his original opponent, got hurt, and he had to fight him anyway just to keep on the card and get a paycheck and stuff. And that was his last fight there at World Series of Fighting 21, which was in June of last year. And for him to take on a guy the caliber of Njokuani on short notice like that, it's big ups to him. I hope he comes back just for doing Bellator a solid. But after that first round, which was pretty close, it seemed like Njokuani kind of picked up the pace a little bit. Obviously, the power in his strikes. He's such a long and lanky guy here for this 170 division. I mean, standing at 6'3", I mean, there aren't even some light heavyweights, or even heavyweights, that is, at 6'3". So the fact this guy's doing it at 170 pounds is pretty impressive. So for this matchup, Njokuani was definitely going to be the favorite. He put that on display. I don't know if that display would have been good enough to beat Douglas Lima, his original opponent, on that night. But for Chide, I think the thing he's got to work on a little bit is his output. It's not necessarily bad, but against these guys like Korzhakov and Douglas Lima and Paul Daly, and even Michael Venom Page a little bit, who again a guy I think has to up his output as well. These are tough guys. These are guys that I don't think are going to be put away with one strike. And these are guys that can eat strikes and are very good at avoiding damage. So if you're just throwing 20 strikes or less around, and they avoid 70% of them, and they're landing, you know, most of their strikes, and they're putting up 50, 60 strikes, and they're in your face, they're testing your conditioning, they're grinding up on you, they're clinching, they're trying to take you down, and you know you're trying to sit back and throw a methodical pace and kind of make sure your conditioning is good for the third round. You're not going to beat some of these top guys. And so that's the one negative I would have for Njokuani. I mean, yeah, he beat Jumbo. Big deal. He was supposed to beat him. But I would like to see a little more output from Njokuani. Now, could be a case of, you know, maybe the 170 cuts a lot. You know, yeah, sure, he's long and likely now, but a guy that is still very young, and maybe a guy that may factor in the 185. I mean, 27, but it's not unrealistic that he could fight at 185. Even at 185 pounds, 6'3" is still a very tall dude. So I still think he's definitely a big guy to watch in Bellator's welterweight division. Looking at the main event, the aforementioned main event there with Eduardo Dantas against Marcus Galvão. Finally, we got to see this fight, and really it was just a complete washout by Eduardo Dantas. It seemed like Galvão, I'm not really sure what he was waiting for or what his game plan was, but he just did nothing in this fight and let Dantas dictate the pace, dictate where the fight was going to take place, and just throw incredible combinations. Credit to Galvão for not getting knocked out after this fight for 27 minutes, or 25 minutes, but it just seemed like Galvão was trying not to lose and was kind of just really just being defensive and was hoping that maybe he would see that one moment where he could land one of those big, powerful hooks that he's capable of, or that one takedown that could lead him to a scramble and a submission, kind of like his Joe Warren victory to get the title. I don't know what it was, or maybe he was fighting a friend again in Eduardo Dantas, or what, but that's not the Galvão that I've been accustomed to seeing in Bellator. Heck, that wasn't even the Galvão that fought him the first time, that being Dantas. So Dantas deserves the victory. Glad this fight finally got to happen. Glad to see Dantas back with the belt. I'm interested in a couple different matchups for him. Of course, Darrion Caldwell, I think, is a very likely possible candidate, considering I think Caldwell does have another fight booked, but I think that would be a tremendous fight. And for Galvão, I don't think he's necessarily done, but he's going to have to rethink some things, because that was just an awful performance. And it's not to say Dantas didn't do well or didn't take Galvão out of his game. I mean, to me, Galvão kind of lost that fight himself. I don't, you know, Dantas could have fought half as good as he did. I think still would have won. It just, Galvão did not show up, and no surprise that Dantas dominates him, with a couple of judges giving him, I think, 2 or 3 eights in the fight. Let's get to UFC Ottawa, the first fight in Canada's capital. 5 fights were featured on the main card for Fox Sports 1, but want to give a shout out to some of the undercard winners, including Joe Soto with his win over Chris Beal, Elias Theodoro defeating Sam Alvey. Friend of the show, Random Marcos, returns back to the win column, defeating Jocelyn Jones-Lawberger. Also, Colby Covington, a guy that bright prospect for the welterweight division, he was able to get a victory. Ali Bogatinov in the flyweight division gets a win. Also, one of the performers of the night bonuses victory. Huge win by Krzysztof Jotko, as he was able to defeat the Barn Cat, who has been on a little bit of roll since returning to the UFC and returning to this middleweight division, as I believe he's won his last, checking here, well, he won his return to the UFC back in December of last year, defeating Josh Salmon, submitting him in the 3rd round, but I believe he had fought in Bellator and a couple of others previously, was on like a 6 or 7 fight win streak, and Jotko was able to knock him out in the 1st round, so awfully impressive win for Krzysztof Jotko, who was able to get his 4th consecutive victory. And since going 1-1 in his first 2 outings, he's beaten the likes of Tor Troing, Scott Askham, Brad Scott in his previous fight in February, and now Tamden McCrory. Big things here for Yako, who's now 18-1. He is just 26 years old, will turn 27 later this year. And I think it's time to take on a little better competition. So I'm looking forward to the man from Poland here. If you weren't evidenced by the flag here behind me. So I definitely think big things are on the way for him, and interested to see what happens with him later this year. Also, Misha Krunkov was able to get another victory, submitting Ian Kuleba. I probably said that completely wrong. Anyways, Misha was able to get the win there. Also, Jason Sago defeated Leandro Silva as well. Main card kicked off with the first ever fight at 125 pounds for women's MMA, and that was Joanne Calderwood take on Valerie Turno. And I thought this may lead to an eventual division, but kind of hearing the commentators and, of course, the post-fight comments, it seems as though Letourneau is slowly building her way back up to fighting at bantamweight again, and kind of wanted a stopgap fight. Calderwood, who has been out of action for over a year, admitted that she put on some weight due to the injury and wouldn't be ready to return at 115 pounds, so both kind of met in the middle there at 125 pounds. While I still think 125 will be a good division for the UFC, it doesn't look like there's any apparent plans, at least in 2016, for that division to come to fruition. But regardless, looking at the fight itself, a brilliant performance by Joanne Calderwood. I really thought the size and power of Letourneau would be the difference in this fight, but one thing that I mentioned about Calderwood, and I think we saw that in her last fight against Courtney Casey, is we got to see that version of her, a version that puts a lot of output, doesn't sit back, kind of wait to counter, use a lot of shots from the outside, but a girl that can get inside the pocket, land powerful combinations, and a girl that can keep coming at you and pressure you with strikes. And that's what we saw in this fight. I mean, besides the third round, the round she finished the fight, she had over 80 thrown strikes in all of those rounds, and in fact, for a fight that didn't go 15 minutes, she threw 239 strikes, landed 142 of them, good clip, not to mention was able to take down Letourneau 3 times on 6 attempts. Really from the get-go, I think Letourneau was maybe surprised by that pressure, maybe even surprised by the power a little bit of Calderwood, and really had no answer for it. I mean, right from the get-go, she was landing shots. I mean, she was throwing some spinning back kicks. Those front kicks Letourneau had no answer for. And it just seemed like Joanne Calderwood was able to get everything off. She looked fantastic. And then that finish there, towards the end of the third round, was landing shots to the body. Letourneau was all sorts of hurt and tied up. And towards the end, there landed more shots to the body. You see Letourneau just kind of walk away. It kind of reminded me of the Michael Chandler fight against Will Brooks, the second one. And just couldn't take anymore, didn't want any of it. And then you saw Calderwood get the finish there in the third round. Awesome win by her, and that's what she needs to do to be successful. And I think it took that loss against Moroz and even the loss against Rose Namajunas going back to the Ultimate Fighter. I figure now girls are going to pressure her to beat her. And the only way that she can avoid that is to amp up the pressure herself. And considering this fight was a year layoff, I think up a weight class helped, like she said, because she gained some weight. But she didn't miss a beat. She looked great, and I'm hopeful that she will be returning. She seemed as though she was going to return to the 115 division after the fight in the post-fight interview with John Aiken. So I'm really excited to see her back in this division, and it's good to have her back because she's a top 10 fighter that I think can challenge with the top fighters of this division. And if she can fight like this, she can be a threat to the championship. Next fight of the evening, I should say, Olivier Aubin-Mercier against Thibaut Gouti. And win is how I thought it would, with Olivier winning by rear naked choke, as I was able to get this fight right. Got the last one wrong, but the man from France had a lot more success than I thought he would, especially in that first round. He was able to stop the takedown. He was able to get off some good strikes. But in that second round, Olivier was able to find a takedown, find success, get some back control, outstrike the Frenchman 40-28. Then in round 3, went back to the well again, and this time was able to sink in the rear naked choke to get the victory in the third round. And this was a nice win for Olivier because he did fight through some adversity. I think he definitely lost that first round. He got tagged a couple times, but overall, still a guy that he should have beat, and he did, and he got a finish. So from that standpoint, it was really good for Mercier, and he was able to get back and win. And once again, I think this was a fight to get a young prospect back on the winning track, and I think a guy that I would like to see him face, I'm going to make sure he hasn't fought him yet, but I don't think he has. I'd like to see him fight a guy like a Jake Matthews. I think would be awfully exciting. I know he kind of trains with him, and I brought up this to him when we had the show, Stevie Ray. I think a fight against Stevie Ray would be excellent because they two train. I don't think that fight would happen. I also think a fight against Brian Barberina would be an exciting fight as well. So we'll see, but nice bounce back win there for Olivier. Boy, I think this may have topped the Ivanov fight just barely, but great fight between Steve Bossy and Sean O'Connell in the light heavyweight division. I think previously I said middleweight, but I didn't realize that Bossy was moving up for this fight. Rather, I thought O'Connell was moving down. Regardless of what division that was, these two just put on a brawl. Looking at these numbers, eerily similar for both guys. 120 of 202 in terms of total strikes landed and thrown for Bossy. 124 to 209 there for O'Connell. Bossy had the only successful takedown between either gentleman, landing that in the second round. First round was close, but to me, O'Connell definitely with that left hand, I believe, that rocked Bossy, almost finished the Canadian, came close, definitely to me took over that round. Second round, Bossy was close to finishing that round and outstruck O'Connell 53-29. And moving into the third round, was a close round. Bossy was definitely landing some power shots, but so was O'Connell. And I thought O'Connell was mixing in the kicks more. I thought was landing more strikes, and according to the striking numbers, outstruck Bossy 47-28 in that round. However, the judges all saw it the way of the boss, Steve Bossy, 29-28 on two cards, and there was even a 29-27 in there. I think they might have gave a 10-8 possibly in round 1 or 2, but I'm kind of surprised that happened. I don't know. The third round was close, but I don't know. I thought O'Connell was getting the better of two. I guess when you have two guys both landing big shots and kind of going back and forth, it can kind of seem like it's a wash. But I thought O'Connell was getting the better of the Canadian. And regardless, it was a great fight. O'Connell should hold his head up high. He had a great performance. But, it was an excellent fight. I just thought it would have went the other way. But I did get the pick right, however, in picking Steve Bossy. Speaking of great performances and once again proving me wrong, I thought, again, maybe I relied too heavy on size and strength in this fight. Is one of the reasons why I picked Letourneau. It's one of the reasons why I picked Patrick Cote. But he was no match for the speed and kicks of Donald Cerrone in this fight, as Donald Cerrone was able to outstrike the French-Canadian 92-57. And also, what a great landing rate. 92 of those total strikes of 140 thrown. Not only that, he mixed in 2 takedowns and did them very easily out of 3 attempts, I might add. The 2 that he actually did land. And I thought the size was going to be a lot for him to contend against a big dude, a guy that hits really hard, has a great chin. But I underestimated how much faster Donald Cerrone would be. And Cote had no answer for that speed. He couldn't really get inside much to make this a brawl, which definitely would have favored him. Cerrone did a great job of staying on the outside, landing those kicks. Like I said, mixed in a couple of takedowns in the first round that I think threw Cote completely off guard. I don't think he was looking to stop any takedowns in this fight. And I think eventually just succumbing to those kicks that set up the great punching combinations from Cerrone, because he was worried about the kicks. He wasn't moving as well as He had in round 1, and also his movement wasn't that great overall because he was looking to kind of get aside, not create angles and kick from the outside and whatnot. And Cerrone eventually wore the guy down and was able to eventually get a knockout, which is another thing I thought wouldn't be done, knocking out Patrick Cote, and he did so. And this definitely puts the welterweight division on notice that this guy can compete with the bigger and stronger guys with this division. Not just simply outpoint them, but knock them out. And this is a very big win for Donald Cerrone. He definitely gets a big-time opponent for his next fight. I don't know. It's hard to speculate. There's kind of a logjam in this division, but I think a guy maybe like a Rick Story, Lorenz Larkin. I know Johnny Hendricks is coming off back-to-back losses. But, well, one loss because I think he had the Matt Brown fight stuck in between there, but then there was the whole weight issue thing with Tyron Woodley. I think Johnny Hendricks would be an excellent opponent. I mean, there's a lot of good fighters for him to take on, and I'm excited, but man, just a great performance by Donald Cerrone. Definitely deserved one of the performance of the night bonuses that he did get. Main event of the evening is Stephen Thompson against Rory McDonald. Win as I thought it did. I did get this pick correct. And if you're going to beat Stephen Thompson, you got to put more output out there. You can't get it done with what Rory McDonald did. 153 strikes in 25 minutes is, to me, not going to get it done, especially when the first 2 rounds you threw a combined 40 strikes. That's just not going to get it done. You got to have way more output. You got to put pressure on him. You got to make Stephen Thompson, back up. You got to make it a brawl. You got to get in close. You can't allow him space to throw those great flashy kicks and jumping in punches. You got to step forward. You can't let him just strike at range and dictate the pace and dictate when he's going to kick you. And for Rory McDonald, I think the first 2 rounds maybe was a feeling out process. He wanted to see the movement. I kind of get that. But going to rounds 3 through 5, yeah, he did up the output, but Stephen Thompson was kind of getting to his flow, and by that point, I think was set what he was going to do, figured out how Rory McDonald was going to attack him, and when Rory McDonald started moving forward, Thompson was ready for it. And even though McDonald amped it up, especially in round 5, you could tell McDonald amped it up. In fact, threw the most strikes he had to any one round, just throwing 41, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. It's only a few strikes per minute. And when you look at Thompson, threw double that, 87 in that round. It just, to me, was a bad performance by Rory McDonald. That's not discrediting Stephen Thompson, but I kind of said this in the pre-fight. Rory McDonald's the guy that he doesn't really win by pressuring guys with a lot of strikes. He tries to outmaneuver guys with footwork and some counter movement. But against Stephen Thompson, that's just not how you're going to beat him. It's just not. And Rory didn't adjust his game plan at all for this fight. And it's no surprise to me that Stephen Thompson walks away with the victory and most likely gets a shot at the UFC title. Now, this wasn't Thompson's most flashy victory, but to prove that he can go 25 minutes with a guy like Rory McDonald, I think is huge, considering what may be next for him in either Tyron Woodley or Robbie Lawler. Getting to this weekend's action real quick, we're going to take a look at Glory 31, which will be in Amsterdam. It'll be on the UFC Fight Pass as well as starting out streaming on ESPN3, then later on ESPN2, Saturday, June 25th. Looking at the Super Fight Series is going to be highlighted by former light heavyweight champion Zach McQuesca as he takes on Buzidi, if I said that correctly. And that will be the main event. Once again, McQuesca headlining the Fight Pass portion of the crowd against Miraz Bouzi. 6-4 is the man from Tunisia taking on the man from Congo. Really excited. I thought McQuesca could have got a shot at the light heavyweight title following his last victory, but once again gets a fight here on the undercard. Also, Senachai, the legend from Thailand, will finally make his long-awaited Glory debut with a unbelievably ridiculous record at 264, 48-2 as he takes on Naat Slami, who's also very impressive but still pales in comparison to Senachai, as he is 60-1. His only fight in Glory was a win over Maltal Yurick, which was an incredible fight from what I remember. So this should be a good fight. I don't really know what to expect from a guy who's fought nearly over 300 times in his career against the guy who, kind of a young up-and-comer. But if Eddie here can defeat Sunshine, that would be a huge victory. That definitely puts him up here in this featherweight division. Also, we're going to have Verbeek against Maspeza. Josh Johnsey, really excited to see him. The Canadian in the lightweight division takes on Mulsiev. And Suarez and Dannenberg will round out the Super Fight Series card. But definitely those top two fights, really looking forward to on the Super Fight Series. The main card will feature a welterweight tournament with some of the top contenders in the division, including Gregorian, Congolo, Gronhart, and Benson Mayor. And Benson Mayor making his Glory debut despite having a fantastic record at 46-5. Unfortunately, he has to fight Mirtha Gronhart. But fortunately for him, it's not the same Mirtha Gronhart I think we saw win a previous welterweight tournament last year, and of course take on Nikki Holtzkin. Since losing to Nikki Holtzkin, Gronhart has definitely looked kind of like a shell of his former self, and even towards the tail end of that Nikki Holtzkin fight, and just looked awful to me against Sandra Doumbé. Now, maybe that was just a bad performance, and maybe he just wasn't hype on Doumbé. I'm not sure what it was, but he can't show up that way in this tournament and expect to win. These guys here are all tough dudes, all top guys, and he can't coast his way through this division. And while Benson Mayor hasn't fought in Glory, 46-5 and 1 draw is nothing to laugh at. And he's a guy trying to make a name for himself off of Gronhart. If he can beat Gronhart and then take out a guy like Congo, who had, to me, a great fight against Nikki Holtzkin despite losing, and another tough guy in Gregorian, then that's awfully impressive in his own right, just beating those guys, let alone doing it in a tournament format twice in one night to earn a shot at a Glory Championship. But if I had to put my money on somebody, I'm picking Congolo. I think he realizes that he was close to defeating Nikki Holtzkin not too long ago at Glory 28, and I think he was close, and I don't think wronged, but I definitely think he realized what he needs to do to be a champion in Glory. And I think he's going to want it. I really do. And that's no offense to the other guys. I think Gronhart, normally I probably pick him. I think he, being such a tall guy in this division, such a big welterweight, I think he's probably the most talented of these four guys. But I got to go with Congolo. I think that momentum, despite losing to Nikki Holtzkin, I think will be a lot in this tournament. But I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a very exciting welterweight tournament. Co-main event, kind of talked about this with a sign. Interesting that Mr. Lant here, Ismail Lant, taking a fight in between what's supposed to be a title shot for him against heavyweight champion Rico Verhoeven, and taking on a man who's been okay in Glory so far, 2-2, 49-15 overall his career from Egypt, and Heze Georges, who has not fought since 2014 for Glory, that is, losing to Ajabuji back at Glory 18. I don't know. As long as Lon still gets his title shot, but for Glory, this is kind of a big risk, because if he loses here to the Egyptian, that's going to be a tough sell against Verhoeven. It's already maybe a tough sell against Verhoeven because he's been so dominant under the Glory banner, and really no one has come close to taking that championship title away from him. You throw in a contender who just lost against the guy who most Glory fans, if you just follow Glory, haven't seen in a very long time. I don't know. It's definitely a risky fight for Lant, at least in the Glory. I mean, he could have took a fight in another organization. He could have lost. He could have won. Maybe no one really would have paid attention, because Glory can still build it up as him being, 2-0, undefeated in the organization. But by fighting in Glory, it's interesting. But maybe, Verhoeven has, I think, ideas of boxing and MMA and maybe leaving Glory and thinking all the challenges have been completed for him under this organizational banner. So maybe he didn't want to wait for Verhoeven, so he takes this fight. But I think it's kind of risky just from a promotional standpoint moving forward if Lon does, in fact, fight Rigo Verhoeven at some point. Main event, couldn't be more excited for Van Hoosmalen against Sidatachi Sitsong-Pyong. I thought Sidachai won their first fight back at Glory 25 in Milan, and I thought Van Hoosmalen maybe got the championship, the champion nod there, winning the decision. But if I'm Sitsong, I go with the exact same strategy. I throw that left back kick that I have, and I just bruise the legs, the body, and the arms of Van Hoosmalen. And towards the end there, start throwing some more punches his way because he's worried about. I go with the exact same strategy. I wouldn't change a thing. And for Van Hoosmalen, knowing that, he has to try to find an answer for it. I'm not sure what that is for him. I don't know if it's using more footwork. I don't know if that's really pushing the pace in the pocket with punches, something that Sitsong-Pyong doesn't do a lot of. He primarily just throws kicks, not a big puncher. So I don't know if it's throwing more punches. I don't know if it's trying to clinch more. I don't know if it's fighting him at his own game and throwing more kicks. I'm not really sure what will be the one way to beat him, but he's got to do something different. And I think despite being the champion, I think the onus is on him to change, because I think Sitsong has a perfect strategy and Van Hoosmalen has to stop it. And I think if Sitsong fights the same way and it goes to the judges again, I highly doubt it will go the same way again. If he fights that way again and loses another decision, I'll be upset. And now, luckily, it should be different judges with being in the Netherlands as opposed to Italy. But man, it would be crazy. But I think Hoosmalen has something to prove in this fight. I really think he's the underdog in this fight, despite being the champion, because I thoroughly thought he got beat that night in Milan. To end the show, I will look at Dynamite 2, Bellator's second attempt at kickboxing and MMA in the same night. And unlike Dynamite 1, which of course featured fighters from Glory and also showed them simultaneously, while there'll be a ring and a cage in the Scott Trade Center, they will not kind of go back and forth. There will be MMA, then it will end, and then we'll start the kickboxing broadcast. So, a little different. I don't know if I'll like that. We'll see what happens when it actually gets on television this Friday night on Spike TV, with MMA, I think, going 8 to 11 and kickboxing going 11 to, I don't know, 12:30 maybe. I'm not sure the exact appropriation of times, but that's more or less how it will fit there on Spike TV, because those times are, of course, Eastern. So, looking at the kickboxing portion of the card just real quickly, of course, we'll start after the MMA portion. The first fight will be former UFC and current UFC fighter, former Strikeforce champions Gilbert Melendez's wife, Carrie Melendez. She's 3-1 in her career. She'll be taking on Sarah Howell. Then amazing welterweight fighter Raymond Daniels will take on Stephen Bruno. Chances are the winner of that fight will fight Gaji for Bellator's so far only weight division title in kickboxing, which is welterweight. And then it will be capped off by the aforementioned Joe Schilling as he takes on Hisati Kato for the second time. This time, however, in a kickboxing ring instead of in an MMA cage with smaller gloves. So, the Carrie Melendez fight, I expect her to win. Kind of funny they couldn't find maybe a higher ranked opponent, because she's planning on doing MMA next. I don't know if she'll stop doing kickboxing, but she's talked about her MMA debut coming up. So maybe they didn't want to ruin that, even though this is kickboxing, of her coming into MMA for them. Raymond Daniels is awfully exciting. I don't think I've seen Stefano Bruno fight, but I'm really looking forward to that one. I think Raymond Daniels is very exciting and definitely shouldn't disappoint in this one. And of course, Joe Schilling versus Kato. Kato with the kind of upset, coming out of nowhere, knocking out Joe Schilling with that Superman punch. Definitely has a chance to win, but I think Joe Schilling in his element, not having to worry about takedowns. I think this is Joe Schilling's fight, even with losing the time around. It's a lot different landing a punch like that in kickboxing as opposed to MMA, and I think Joe Schilling, with those comments I talked about earlier, him being bitter about leaving Glory, I think kind of has something to prove. He's kind of now the unofficial face of Bellator kickboxing, and I think he's going to be looking to put on a show, and also, like I said, maybe get that bitter taste of his mouth of glory, and also his last fight there against Jason Wilness. So I think Cotto might be in trouble in this one. And again, it's not like he can't win, but I don't know if he has a lot of professional kickboxing background. So, and when's the last time he competed in said kickboxing? I mean, Joe Schilling just did it a couple months ago. So, should be interesting. Like I said, it's kind of weird that they're throwing it after the MMA event instead of kind of doing it interchangeably. Maybe that's really just trying to promote kickboxing in his own organization instead of kind of being a weird offshoot of MMA. So I'm excited, though. I am really excited for the kickboxing portion of the card. Looking at the MMA portion of the card, a lot of fights for the MMA portion, but the 4 fights that will be on the main card start off with a women's tilt at 125 pounds as Alima Mifarin takes on Rebecca Roof. Don't know a lot about those 2 ladies. We'll see. I think they're definitely in a position where nobody's looking to that fight for a lot, so that could end up being a fight that steals the show. Matt Mitrione will make his promotional debut taking on Carl Semanfatu. Probably said that completely wrong. Mitrione, of course, his last fight losing to Travis Brown in the UFC for his 5th loss, the whole eye poke thing and whatnot. Of course, he has been the Bellator kickboxing announcer or color commentator and did so for their first ever event. So I wonder if, win or lose, he will then come out to color commentate Dynamite. I don't know. That'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see. So I'm looking forward to that. But Mitrione's a solid heavyweight, has a lot of hand power. So I don't know about Samatu Mantufa. I'm not going to even try. All right, moving on. Co-main event for Dynamite: Michael Chandler against Patricky Pitbull. Of course, we all know Will Brooks just signed with the UFC. He's going to have his first fight against Ross Pearson at the Ultimate Fighter 23 finale coming up July 8th. So with him leaving, they have a vacant spot. I like Michael Chandler in it, but I was kind of surprised they went with Pitbull, to be honest. I think his last fight was not that great of a performance. I mean, Derek Anderson's beat this dude twice now, and somehow Patricky Pitbull gets vaulted ahead of him. I don't know. I think it's just because of the bigger name, but to me this night, wasn't really so much about the names. It was about Quentin Rampage Jackson fighting in the main event against Satoshi Ishii, who I guess is a former Judo World Champion and stuff like that. And he's I don't know. This guy I've never heard of before. Yeah, maybe an accomplished grappler, but he's taking on Quentin Rampage Jackson, who is going to be a little bigger, a little taller, and I don't know. They list his weight at 240 on MMA Junkie at 5'11", and I think Rampage is like 6'2", if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how much Rampage normally weighs. 6'1" Rampage is listed. So it's going to be a little taller. I think Rampage normally walks around 230 to 240 anyway when he's in camp, so I don't foresee that being a problem. And Ishii lost his last fight to Yuri Prozaska, which was at Risen 1 on New Year's Eve. And he also had lost to Fedor. That's the most recent, and that was back at Dream in 2011. So I don't know if he was hurt all that time or just the information that Junkie has is not that up to date. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'm proven wrong, but this should be Jackson's fight to win. I think this is about reestablishing Rampage in Bellator, because why else give him an opponent nobody's ever heard of? That's my thinking, but I'm excited. Dynamite's excited. I hope it delivers, because I think the first one, it wasn't horrible, but I think the fights maybe weren't as great as they could have been. They had that weird one-night tournament. There were some injuries in there. They had it on a Saturday. This will be on Bellator's normal night of Friday. They did it against college football. I think that a lot rides on this, because I think they're trying to get kickboxing off for Bellator. They're trying to pull over people who have been watching Bellator MMA for a year that maybe haven't been watching kickboxing. So I think this is a really big event for Bellator, and it doesn't have one of those weird. I don't think the Rampage fight I would call a freak show. It doesn't have one of those weird freak shows like Ken Shamrock or Kimbo Slice or Hoist Gracie or Tito Ortiz or anything like that. It has actual people fighting that are active fighters and actually are trying to win championships and get to championship contention and all that sort of stuff. So I think this is a big night for Bellator, and I hope it delivers. Well, that about does it here for me on this week's show. Again, as I mentioned, I am Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Instagram as well at the Jim Gramm. You can stay tuned with Beyond the Cage on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. And of course, you can subscribe right here to get updates of when new videos are updated to the channel at youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. So, once again, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And once again, you have been listening to Beyond the Cage.